Hi, thanks for joining us today for Empowering FE Learning. Today is episode 5. It's about empowering childcare learning, and it's the season finale. So I've got like mixed views on this one. Really sad that we're going to be finishing up the season today, but we've got a really good episode today. My name's Gavin O'Mara. I'm the CEO and founder of FE News, and I'm joined by.
Hi, I'm Tom Randall, product manager at Jet Learning. Thanks, Gavin, for having me.
Oh no, Tom, it's been a great season, and thanks for joining us on this one and our season finale. Tom, we was talking before the show, loads of interesting stuff why empowering childcare learning is really kind of important, particularly with what's happening in government at the moment and priority areas. I don't know if you just wanted to share a few sort of thoughts that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, childcare is a major priority of the Labour government. There's a target of 70,000 childcare places required to meet the growing demand. Yet there's still a significant shortfall in qualified entrants going into the industry. So part of the Labour government's plan for change, they're putting significant additional investment into early years provision, an additional £2 billion committed to deliver on its promise to expand government-funded early education for working parents. So that's coming in September 2025, so just in a few months' time. There's been a £75 million expansion grant as well, allocated to support nurseries, childminders, other providers, to deliver that 35,000 additional staff that they need and additional 70,000 places I mentioned. It's a really big demand, but I think we need to ask, and hopefully we can kind of tackle some of these issues today. What more can we do to ensure our education, our skills system is set up adequately to support those new entrants to the industry? And what can we do to meet those ambitious targets? What can technology do? What kind of forms of blended learning? What kind of things can we do to support those learners, both in the classroom, in a kind of conventional teaching setting, as well as the kind of more practical, hands-on setting that the early years professionals will be facing? So yeah, really interesting time across the FE sector, but particularly for childcare. And yeah, really big numbers and big targets to meet.
Yeah, definitely, and thanks for giving that, because it's trying to bring it all together, isn't it, as to where we're sort of going to with it, really. It's two really interesting guests. I mean, we could talk about this for brief. I'd love to bring in and Beth and Emma. So we've got Emma Tibbetts, who I'm going to bring into the stage now. Hello, Emma. How are you?
Good morning. I'm very well. Thank you for having me.
Oh, no worries, Emma. Thanks for joining us. So it's Emma from Foundations for Education. And we've got Beth. Beth, can I bring you in? Hey, Beth.
Hi, good morning. Steph Wild from Wigan College. I'm the Head of Health, Early Years and Science. Thank you for having me this morning.
Oh, no problems at all. I was going to ask actually, and maybe I could start with Emma. Maybe if you could just briefly introduce yourself and your role in early years education and training.
Absolutely. So yeah, my name's Emma Tibbetts. I'm currently the Director of Foundations First Education. And my background really has been as an early years and primary specialist with nearly almost 20 years in the sector now. I've worked as an early years lead, I've worked as a head teacher, and most recently have worked for the world's largest global schools group, developing digital content for over 12,000 teachers to support online and blended learning. I'm also currently working with Hatchet to look at developing over 100 lessons for those learning their level 2 and level 3 early years practitioner qualifications. So yeah, lots of experience across different parts of the education sector with an early years hat on. And in response to what you were just saying, Tom, in terms of the push from the government and the excitement we're seeing there in terms of additional funding, I've also been recently supporting several schools groups to write bids to open new nurseries, all of which have been successful. So very much part of the projects of, setting up brand new early years education, and having that blank canvas is just really exciting. So that's a little bit about things I've been involved in, but early years has always been my absolute passion, and continues to be at the forefront of all that I do.
That's cool. Beth, can I get things off with you? So, have you seen blended learning evolve in early years educator training, and what impact has it had on learners? Because it's gone through a huge amount of change over quite a short period. I'd love to hear your sort of views on that.
I think the biggest thing for me now around this work is that we've gone from being responsive. So we was thrown into it, weren't we? We had to do online learning, we had to look at blended learning models, and we sort of just made it work. And we've developed that provision massively now, and we are looking at how does that blended learning model complement the work that we do in the classroom, and how does it complement learners' understanding and getting that theoretical basis before they go into a practical environment. One of the piece of work that I'm doing is around the VR technology that we're using and designing and creating virtual realities that students can utilise prior to going out into setting. So I think that's one of the biggest benefits that we've seen from the developments in the early years sector, is that students can work in, what they argue is a psychologically safe environment where they can make mistakes, where both tutors and students can be reflective on the practice before they are put out into industry with our children and supporting our young people like that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think it's having that flexibility and permission to be able to make mistakes, isn't it? But with early years setting, you're entrusting your precious bundle to someone to be able to look after. You don't really want someone to be able to have that environment that really takes the pressure off, doesn't it? Really, and enables people to learn. You learn through your mistakes a lot more, don't you?
Absolutely, and I think it's one thing that we've noted, that there's a difference in young people that are coming through the sector at the moment, in that we are dealing with different, concerns around young people. We've got things around anxiety, the social aspects that are quite different for them now, what they might have been 5 years ago. So it's about helping them build that resilience and providing them with that growth mindset and showing them that they can achieve these things before they go out into that environment as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. Emma, what have you seen around blended learning, how it's evolved with early years setting and the such?
Yeah, so as Steph said, we were kind of all thrown into it and, because of the pandemic, and we saw a massive shift, we all had to be online. And since the pandemic has ended, there has been that desire to kind of people wanting to reconnect and come back to being in person. But to Steph's point, that does look slightly differently now. So having to evolve to meet the different needs of our learners and what they need individually now. And community is quite hard to recreate. And I think there is no substitute for, that face-to-face in terms of developing that learning community together and that support that we can offer one another when we are in a room together learning. But it's ensuring that we have that balance. And I guess the benefits of having all of the online offers is we can offer the students the flexibility there, can't we? We can offer them, that in person and online. I know that I often now, when I deliver training courses to early years practitioners, I always offer that hybrid approach. So come and join in person and come and join online. And it's being mindful as a facilitator of those sessions, how to ensure it's inclusive for all. So there's lots of learning around there. I've done things, like to do lots of hands-on practical activities during training sessions to keep them interactive. And it's ensuring that those that are at home have had that sent in advance so they can have the things that they need printed if need be. It's just thinking, how can we make this inclusive for everyone, even if we've got people in the room or people at home? And then lastly, I think, knowledge is easy to teach online using those digital tools. But for me, it's that modelling aspect, the things that a computer can't do as well, in terms of modelling those sorts of characteristics, I guess, we want our early years practitioners to have: the empathy, the perseverance, the kindness, the generosity, those things we can read about. But we know in teaching, modelling is absolutely key for our learners. So it's ensuring that we're able to bring that in and that doesn't get lost through the blended learning approach.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think the issues of inclusivity and, like what you're saying, Steph, about students coming through, the types of demographic you have of the student body, it's really interesting. You've both touched on this a little bit already, but for each of you, what's the number one benefit that you think has come out of this shift to blended learning? The one thing you could point to and say, this has been great for the learning experience. Emma, should we start with you?
Sure. I'm going to break the rules and say two things that I think are brilliant. Always a bit of a rule breaker. I think just the flexibility that students can learn anywhere. They can access that content and at their own pace. So, you know, being able to rewatch things, to reaccess things, really supportive of the individual needs. And also just the opportunity to view a wide range of settings. Years ago, you'd be in one place, that was your one place you were in, whereas now we're able to open their world to such a broad and rich variety of settings as they are learning about what early years looks like in different situations, the different challenges, etc. So they would be my two things.
Fantastic. And Steph?
Yeah, Emma's have excellent answers and something that I would have said anyway. But I think one of the big things for me is around reflection. So students have that opportunity to look at what they're doing in a different environment. And most importantly, they feel far more prepared and more confident to go out on placement and work with the children in the community.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Yeah, I think we've also touched on the idea of practical work. How have you found blended learning has helped prepare both you as educators, but also your learners to kind of get to grips with the practical aspects of working with children? Steph, any thoughts?
Yeah, so like Emma said, you know, modelling is massive and a really big part of what we do, and we know that lots and lots of learning comes from that. I think it can go both ways. So you can look at using the blended model and online learning to do the underpinning theory that can make things, you know, things that don't necessarily need to be as interactive and then types of things. It gives learners the opportunity to break away and spend some time working a little bit more on the things they don't quite understand. From our standpoint with young people, it makes them more of an expert learner. You know, there's not as much of there's us constantly giving them the content, and they've got to, you know, go away and source some of them things and build their own confidence in that knowledge. But on the flip side of it, and something that we probably utilise it more for at the moment is around that practical element. So again, it's like I said, using the VR, looking at role plays and the reflective practice on that. So I think it just depends on where a student is on their journey with that, and what type of qualification or learning that they're doing. But yeah, I think it can work both ways.
Fantastic. And Emma, any thoughts?
Yeah, again, completely agree with Steph, and seen very similar things in use of practice. I think videos of that practice, just being able to watch again and again and just be able to reflect. We've used lots of sort of digital online journals where, and that feeds into what you were saying, Steph, about that reflection and how key that is to keep coming back to watch again, to rethink and to discuss at length with other students around their findings and their thoughts. Just a wealth of case studies and scenarios. So yeah, I think you answered it brilliantly, Steph. I'm not sure what else I can add.
I'll ask everyone, making sure that really, how do we ensure that online digital learning remains engaging still, and really interactive for trainees? How are you sort of going about like different strategies to make sure that things are engaging and still interactive? Because sometimes, like you said, it's the different, the role, the job is actually working with young people, and like, you know, how do we ensure that blended learning, you know, digital training is really interactive?
So for me, again, it comes back to like the beginning, you know, we've gone from being responsive and we do a tick box almost exercise within a lesson plan. And it's about making sure, you know, we're keeping learners on the toes. They don't know what the format's going to look and feel like. It's involving gamification in some of the delivery that what we do, you know, they get more interaction, enjoyment out of it from that way. We do a lot of group projects. So we don't just, the reflection isn't just from tutors, you know, we do it peer on peer that leads into the qualifications that they're doing. So in particular, a lot of our provision is T level, and what that, you know, requires is the role plays, is a reflection. So we make sure that it isn't just like the old school chalk and talk, but on a computer. It is completely interactive with the breakout rooms and then types of things. Yeah.
No, cool. Yeah. Emma, what sort of ways are you sort of engaging?
Just to add to that, I think, you know, at the heart of everything we do, we've got to think about the why and the what we're doing. And I think, you know, Steph's touched on it there in the sense of is keeping that educational pedagogical principles at the heart. What, you know, what we would want for a great lesson for our students without any digital content, those principles should remain in the blended sense. So in terms of, you know, those projects and things Steph was just talking to, what we're thinking about here is collaboration, it's participation, it's reflection, it's hands-on learning, all of these things that we know are the pillars of great learning and great practice. And then, yeah, just ensuring that we are creating those opportunities digitally. And you know, that could be that interactivity through the screen, whether that's through polls, multiple choice, but those forums as well for students to be able to connect with one another and their teachers. You know, so you've got that check-in going alongside. We often use things like before, you know, keeping students on toes, not just thinking about pre-assessing their knowledge and what they already know before we start maybe a new topic, but also thinking about how confident they're feeling. So it's touching on them and their sense of self and where they are at individually as a learner. And that's something that's really quite powerful for teachers to support their students with, because sometimes you might have a student that might know all of the answers, but actually doesn't feel particularly confident. So having that kind of hybrid of, you know, we're not just checking the knowledge and the skills, but we're checking how you're feeling about accessing this content and continually opening those avenues for student feedback. How did you find that today? You know, what did you like about it? And then, you know, responding to their responses.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I was going to ask around, we've mentioned inclusivity, but also Steph, you've also mentioned around, you know, cohort of learners, particularly since the pandemic. There's been an increase in things like anxiety, mental health, and well-being. How are you ensuring or trying, you know, with yeah, no one's got these things cracked, but how are you trying to you know, think of inclusion with people around like neurodiversity, but also to make sure that you're touching on things of being mindful around anxiety, but also equipping someone for that resilience for when they're in the job as well. Emma, I don't know if you want to sort of touch on any sort of ideas or thoughts that you've seen around that.
Well, there's lots of sort of quick things that can be done with the digital tools in terms of inclusivity. So if you're thinking about students that are coming in with English as an additional language, there's a brilliant facility of just being able to translate things really brilliantly, and having a wealth of sort of glossary and definitions of, you know, students to ponder over, because sometimes some of the language, the terminology around early years and all the acronyms and things, it actually takes quite a long time to grasp. So just being able to provide those even as handouts or downloads and things like that students can look at. And I think, again, just keeping things really open and walking alongside your students, even virtually, the checking in, how was this? How did you find this? And taking, as I said before, that feedback on board and really listening to the experience of the student. Everything that I support companies to create, we go and get, you know, huge amounts of feedback before we publish anything, because we want to, you know, we want to test it out in the field and see what they have to say. So yeah, checking to you know, put yourself in the shoes really of the students and adapt the content and the approach accordingly.
Yeah, that sounds cool. Steph, I know you mentioned a few things around sort of you know, cohort with anxiety and the such. What things have you been trying to do to ease that, but also develop that resilience as well?
I think it's just like Emma said, you know, it's no different to how you would work with students within the classroom. Is how you would work with them online. You would still look at the additional needs of all individual learners and you treat them as individuals. But it's just about adapting how you would do that. So you might have some tools that you use in the classroom that you couldn't use in an online environment because, you know, logistically it doesn't lend itself to that. But even just really simple things like, you know, having a transcript on what's being said for those learners that might not, you know, have sufficient technology. Even it might not be an actual additional need of theirs. It might just be that there's an issue with the technology or their environment that they're in. And even things like the private chat that you've got and the functions where a student might make notes and ask you a question. whilst you're in the flow, it's more difficult, isn't it, to engage like that on online. But we use the private chat function so that we can ask each other questions in that type of environment. It doesn't necessarily have to be big grand changes that you need to make. It's just being responsive to those individuals. And like you said, I think what comes from that is building confidence, in particular in learners that are going into these, front-facing sectors where they're going to be going out into industry and working with parents and children and other, professional people. It's also making sure that is building blocks as well. So you might go from a learner who really just cannot put their camera on, or cannot speak, but they might be able to send it in a message. And then that's about you setting those targets with those learners and building on that confidence so that, by the end or partway through, then we can see that positive steps so that they are more ready to go and out into the work environment.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I'm always kind of interested in what does the future hold and the fact. But what do you both sort of see the future holds for blended learning in early years educator training, or how can we continuously have this continual improvement strategy? You've talked about marginal gains there and stuff like that. And Emma, what do you see the future to be, and how can we continuously improve blended learning?
Well, who knows what the future will hold? Things are changing quickly, aren't they? I think it's inevitable we're going to see that increased use of AI. I know lots of organisations are already using it, more so in secondary, I think, actually, in terms of that responsiveness of students' assessments or their learning, to be able to fast track at a quicker rate, the response of how a student is responding in their learning, so that it ensures that they're learning where they need to be and they're not sitting through content they don't necessarily need to be sitting through. So I think more of a personalised approach through AI development. And I think just adding to the variety of content that's out there. So if we're teaching a particular concept, having the technology to be able to offer, well, you can learn it this way or that way. It can be through a video or a podcast or a webinar, or the same content but offered in such a variety of ways is surely going to reach a much larger group of learners.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's really cool. Beth, what would you sort of see the future for blended learning to potentially be, and how can we continuously improve?
Who knew we'd be looking at VR, virtual realities on headsets in classrooms 5 years ago? Who knew that's where we would be today? So, like Emma said, who knows where we're going to be in another 5 years' time? I think it can only be a positive thing as long as we keep control of it, and most importantly, that we keep learning and young people and learners at the centre of everything what we do. Technology can take off and can take us in certain directions, but we are still educating young people to go and work in environments where they are face to face. So ultimately, we need to make sure we can still continue to hone those skills with young people. So I think it's just about us having the confidence in utilising that technology, but also knowing when it's got a purpose and when we need to continue with the face to face.
Yeah, that's cool. Mom, I'll bring you into it because, we're talking today around empowering childcare learning, but you've got a really interesting role where you're looking at blended learning across many different sectors, and sometimes we can learn something from, engineering, which we can then go, that was a genius idea, and bring this back over to childcare. What do you sort of see the future of blended learning to be, or would want to be, and how are you sort of looking at that continuous improvement strategy?
Yeah, really good question, Gavin. And I think it's really interesting what Steph's saying about VR, because that's something I've really seen starting to explode over the last kind of year, 18 months. I was at North Kent College a few weeks ago, and they've got a really impressive space related to their engineering department, but also with their employability skills. I think what they do is they have a range of headsets, which obviously a lot more affordable now than they used to be a few years ago, which I think is a great removal of that barrier for students. But they have a bank of headsets which allow them to do the role plays, the kind of the mock interviews, put them in a position where they're actually confronted with a situation and a scenario in quite an immersive format, but removing that element of risk. So obviously think for childcare, that'd be really, really valuable. And I imagine that's the way that you're using it, Steph, at Wigan and Lee. Putting learners in a very kind of face-to-face situation, they're confronted with a scenario. How do you respond to it? And thinking about the kind of wider environmental contextual issues as well. So, as I said, I think the cost is a really big issue for colleges and education providers. And with that coming down for technology every year, it just enables learners to kind of get to grips with it, kind of approach situations, scenarios which they wouldn't necessarily be able to face without the element of risk or kind of sensitivity. So yeah, I think that immersion is really, really important. And I think it's such a practical vocational subject and an area of expertise. Whatever we can do to kind of encourage and support learners in that is really valuable.
Yeah, and I think it's a really important point, Tom, actually, about saying as time goes on, you'd hope that costs would go down for certain, like, hardware kit, isn't it? Like headsets and the such. I think, Emma, you had a really interesting point around personalisation with AI, and it's just different ways that we can have that feedback, isn't it, as well, around how we can sort of be learner focused, but also I think Steph is all about immersing really and reflective is things to come over time and time again, of everything you're saying is around that whole reflective practice, which is brilliant. We've got just a little bit of time left. It's not by, but if you could have, you're dream big, Steph and Emma, and if you could do anything that you could to empower more childcare learning and thinking of blended learning, what would you want to see in the future, Emma?
Wow, quite ambitious, and I do have big dreams. But I think I would be lying if I said that I don't have a slight worry that Steph touched on it again. That pedagogical principles, the heart, the students being the heart, wouldn't maybe get lost as we get sort of excited by the vast developments of technology. So for me, it's quite simple, and it's that would remain, and that all of the learning that we have from years past and the learning that we continue to have as leaders of teaching these wonderful students, that we will hold on to those things that are important. That is the collaboration, the participation, the in-person, the human to human support, and not be sort of blindsided by technology and allowing that to drive, but let the people and the pedagogy drive. That would be my hope, I guess. Maybe not my dream, but my hope.
And Beth, what would you want to see if you could dream big? What would you want to see to empower more childcare learning?
I think exactly what Emma said, and it echoes like what I said earlier. We want it to be supplementary and not taking over what we do. Yeah, dreaming big. I think it would be that VR becomes on that next level, and it feels like they can physically feel things, and it's more interactive in that respect. Again, I just think it's striking the balance of ensuring that we are maintaining, that we are creating resilient young people to go out into sector, and not, I suppose, putting them in a bubble of AI and virtual technology so that they don't feel that they can go and do that, because we're never going to lose that, are we? We're still going to need these young people to go out and do these roles. I think it can be quite exciting, but I just think it has got warning signs as well, that we need to strike that balance.
Yeah, no, definitely. What a really, really cool point. That we're out of time, everyone, and what a really cool episode today has been. Emma, Steph, I want to say thank you for joining us and just sharing ideas and the future. And Tom, what a great co-host you've been also. And I'm a bit gutted that that today is the end of the season. I want to say thank you for everyone for joining us. I know people have joined us all the way through. It's interesting because I think it's what can we learn from childcare, or that could also go into construction or engineering or hospitality, and how we can sort of take those best practices and continuously improve. It's just really, really cool to be able to do that. Don't we live in an exciting time when we're gonna be able to have, like, people say, look, what the pandemic was the sort of draw a line under all the weird mask wearing sort of malarkey and stuff, and all of the craziness that happened with that. But it's on like a really exciting new period of how we engage and educate people. And like you said, Steph, it's even that balance as well, isn't it, around in person, but also using technology to better support that. But I just want to say thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Hestet Learning, for taking us on a journey with this. It's been really, really cool season, and how we've empowered everyone. And it's just the start of the journey, really, isn't it? And I just wanted to say thank you, everyone, for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the season, and check out Effie News for all the episodes if you've missed those, and we'll see you until next time. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, no worries. Thank you.